welcome back to the Room of Requirement. Today I'm going to be talking about completing the great work, the crossing the abyss, and attaining knowledge and conversation with the HGA, also known as the Holy Guardian Angel. So we talk about this a lot in high magic. It doesn't really get explained in depth because these are stages of enlightenment. They are different stages and milestones that you reach when you practice ritual magic. I'm sure that other practices, other schools of thought have these same milestones, just probably in different terminology. But I haven't seen too many videos on these three things together, so I wanted to kind of explain what these things are because you hear them thrown around in esoteric circles all the time. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Okay. So by the way, these are advanced spiritual attainments. Okay, this is the goal. So as high magicians, this is our goal to achieve these attainments, and they're seen as more advanced. Okay. So these are not metaphors. Within ceremonial magic and related esoteric systems, these are certain concepts that are often repeated but rarely understood. The great work, knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, and crossing the abyss. These are not symbolic ideas meant only for contemplation. They describe stages of development that reorganize the practitioner at a fundamental level. At the same time, they are often misunderstood, exaggerated, or taken out of sequence, leading many to either dismiss them or claim them prematurely. To understand these properly, they must be approached not as isolated events, but as phases within a larger process. Stages of transformation, not isolated experiences. These concepts do not refer to single moments that occur once and are complete. They describe shifts in structure, changes in identity, perception, and stability that unfold over time and must be integrated. They also exist under different names across traditions. What is described in ceremonial magic as knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel has parallels in mystical Christianity as alignment with divine will, in Sufism as the inner guide, and in contemplative traditions as stabilized, non-reactive awareness guided by a deeper intelligence. The language differs, but the transformation follows a similar pattern. The great work. The total transformation of the practitioner. The great work is the overarching aim of ceremonial magic and many esoteric traditions. The complete transformation of the practitioner from a fragmented, reactive state into a coherent, aligned, and intentional being. It is not a single attainment, but the entire process of refinement, integration, and realization. Psychologically, the great work begins with fragmentation, where the practitioner experiences internal contradiction between thought, intention, and action. Over time, through sustained practice, these divisions begin to resolve and a sense of alignment emerges. What this feels like is gradual coherence rather than sudden illumination. The practitioner begins to notice less internal conflict, clearer decision-making, and a growing sense of stability in perception and response. The challenge is that the process is often subtle and long-term, which can lead to impatience or the desire for more dramatic confirmation. And it comes so subtly when it does happen. You guys have heard me talk about this before. Knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel. Alignment with the inner directive intelligence. Knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel, emphasized in traditions connected to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and expanded by Aleister Crowley, represent a stabilized alignment with inner directive intelligences. This is not typically experienced as an external entity in a literal sense, but as a consistent and non-reactive clarity that guides thought and action without conflict. Psychologically, this stage reflects a unification of conscious intention and deeper unconscious processes. The practitioner no longer operates from fragmentation, but from coherence. What this feels like is simplicity. Decisions become clear not because complexity disappears, but because internal contradiction is reduced. This state is often misunderstood as something dramatic or constantly communicative, when in reality it becomes increasingly quiet and stable over time. The challenge is distinguishing this from emotional intensity or imagination. Figures associated with this process include Abrambolin and Crowley, though both describe it as a process rather than a singular event. Crossing the abyss. The dissolution of identity structure. Crossing the abyss represents a profound restructuring in which the practitioner's existing identity framework dissolves. This is not an insight or realization in the conventional sense, but a shift in the structure of perception itself. In Kabbalistic terms, it is associated with moving beyond structured levels of consciousness into a state that cannot be organized in the same way. What this feels like initially is instability. The practitioner may experience a loss of familiar reference points where previous identities, beliefs, and internal structures no longer function. This can feel disorienting if not understood. However, when integrated, it leads to a more fluid and less reactive form of awareness. The challenge here is significant. At this stage, it cannot be forced or approached prematurely. Without sufficient preparation, it leads to fragmentation rather than transformation. Timeline of attainment. How these stages actually unfold. These stages do not occur quickly, and they do not follow a fixed schedule, but traditional systems consistently indicate a general progression. In the early years of practice, often 1 to 3 years, the practitioner is engaged in the foundational aspects of the great work, stabilizing attention, regulating internal states, and beginning to integrate surface-level patterns. This phase is often subtle and can feel uneventful, which is why many practitioners underestimate its importance. Between approximately 3 to 7 years of consistent structured practice, deeper alignment begins to emerge. This is where the condition for knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel may develop, not as a sudden event, but as a gradual stabilization of clarity and direction. This phase reflects a reduction in internal contradiction and an increase in coherence. Beyond this, often after many years or even a decade or more, deeper reconstruction becomes possible. This is where crossing the abyss is traditionally placed, not as an early milestone, but as a late-stage transformation requiring substantial preparation. Attempting to approach this stage prematurely results in instability rather than realization. These timelines are not rigid, but the sequence remains consistent. Foundation, alignment, and then restructuring. How these stages relate. The great work encompasses the entire process. Knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel represents a major point of alignment within that process. Crossing the abyss represents a later stage reconstructing that occurs only after significant integration. These are not interchangeable states, but phases within a progression. Many practitioners experience fragments of these states, moments of clarity, insight, or disillusion, and interpret them as full attainment. In reality, these stages are defined by stability, not intensity. What matters is not what is experienced once, but what remains consistent over time. What real attainment looks like. Real attainment is quiet, stable, and integrated. It doesn't require constant validation or produce ongoing intensity. It is reflected in how the practitioner thinks, acts, and perceives over time. Alignment is seen in coherence, and deeper transformation is seen in reduced identification and increased stability under pressure. These concepts are not distant or abstract. They are descriptions of what happens when a path is followed with depth, discipline, and continuity. They are not separate from these practices, but the result of them. False versus real attainment. The difference between experience and transformation. One of the most common misunderstandings on the spiritual path is confusing experience with attainment. Experiences can be intense, meaningful, and even transformative in the moment, but they do not necessarily indicate that a structural shift has occurred. A practitioner may have moments of clarity, insight, or even temporary dissolution of identity, and interpret these as completion, when in reality they are glimpses, brief openings into states that they have not yet stabilized. False attainment is often characterized by intensity without continuity. It may involve powerful emotional experiences, vivid internal imagery, or a sense of profound realization that fades over time. The practitioner may feel certain that they have reached a significant stage, but this certainty is often tied to the experience itself rather than what remains after it is passed. There can also be subtle inflation where identity reorganizes around the idea of attainment rather than dissolving into coherence. Real attainment, by contrast, is defined by stability. It does not depend on repeating experiences or maintaining a particular state. Instead, it is reflected in how the practitioner thinks, responds, and perceives over time. Where false attainment fluctuates, real attainment remains. Where false attainment seeks validation, real attainment requires none. It becomes evident not through what is felt in a moment, but through what no longer destabilizes the practitioner. Another key distinction is that the false attainment often creates separation, while real attainment reduces it. The practitioner may feel set apart, advanced, or distinct in some way, reinforcing identity rather than refining it. In contrast, real attainment tends to dissolve unnecessary distinction, creating a quieter, more integrated state that doesn't rely on comparison. This is why traditional systems emphasize time and integration. A true shift must remain stable across changing conditions, different emotional states, external pressures, and internal fluctuations. If what has been experienced cannot be maintained or integrated, it has not yet become attainment. If something feels profound but requires constant effort to hold on to it, it's likely an experience. If something becomes stable without effort, even in the absence of intensity, it is moving towards attainment. Function within the path. Understanding this distinction protects the practitioner from both overestimating and underestimating their progress. It prevents premature conclusions while also allowing subtle but real development to be recognized. The path is not built on moments, but on what these moments become over time. Final closing. The great work, the knowledge and conversation of the Holy Garden Angel, and the crossing of the abyss are not ideas to be collected or states to be claimed. They are stages of transformation that unfold when a practitioner remains with a path long enough for it to reorganize how they think, perceive, and exist. They are not defined by intensity or isolated experience, but by what becomes stable and consistent over time. And this is where many misunderstand them, because what is real in this work doesn't announce itself through dramatic moments, but through alignment, clarity, and the gradual dissolution of internal conflict. When understood correctly, these stages are not something to chase, but something to recognize as a natural unfolding of the path, practiced with discipline and structure, where over time, the practitioner is no longer trying to become something, but it is being shaped into something that no longer requires effort to maintain. Okay, you guys, so I've had similar experiences where I've reached these milestones and sat with them for a while. I learned over time not to immediately interpret these types of experiences. I guess I had experienced one time where you would call it the witness or the observer effect during hexagram rituals. And I sat with that for months before I finally figured out what was going on. So we reach these different stages, not fully, but we start to, over time, if you practice long enough, you will start to feel these different things start to happen within you. And once you are grounded enough and can interpret them over time and they stay consistent, like I talked about, then you know that you're getting somewhere, that you're starting to make progress. Okay, so I hope this helps. I hope all of these terms are more solidified in your understanding. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Next up is going to be esoteric astrology, where I'm going to talk about the different eras and the precession of the equinoxes and get a little bit more into that. So far, that's all the ideas I have, but I'm sure in the next couple of weeks I'll come up with some good stuff. If you guys have any ideas of what you want me to cover, please drop it down in the comments below. I appreciate every one of you guys. Thank you for sticking around, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.